So good evening, everybody. I will share a few words. Actually, before I even do any of that, I just want to say Tsimshian Haisla, Skwomesh, I quite swallow and quins Huyaneh, Tan Stilum, Tan Whale, Sets no Unist'ot'en Stilum, at Homatquim Oz Stilum, Echo Stilum, Tsimshian Haisla. I just wanted to share a thank you to my sister for sharing that beautiful song. It's one of my favorite songs that come from Homatquim, so I like hearing it when they sing it. So. And I think there's something, I don't know, for me, and I don't know if it is for anybody else that might speak another language, but there's something, when I think of honoring somebody, I think there's something beautiful about honoring people in the language that they belong to, and that belongs to them. So I've been grateful and fortunate over the last couple of years to learn Hunkaminam, which is Unist'ot'en people's language, as well as the language of the Tsleil-Waututh people from what many people know as Tsleil-Waututh. And I've had an opportunity to learn a bit of their language with the work that I've been helping that community and revitalizing Hunkaminam within the community in North Vancouver. I've also been involved with my own community, which is the Skwomesh Nation. I'm a member of the Skwomesh Nation. Grew up and lived in North Vancouver all my life. And I've been learning and working to revitalize my people's language, which we call Skwomesh, which is the word that is the same as the name for my people. So our language and the name for our people is the same. So Skwomesh. So I just want to share a few words, introduce myself in my language, which I would say, Nawa nan taswit Khelsilem. Na mekau tan kushame not tequetli unsettle. Tioltalo quis nas tan settle. Nawa jin equintum ta kushame Khelsilem. Not stopness a Aslahan not to que Kwashamin Tana or Tan Sepio Neta Stratmok Tialtalo Plansettle. Hot and small and Quin's Quatchnonia. I just wanted to share that they call me Khelsilem, which is a name that was given to me by my grandmother. Her name is Tialtalo Audrey Rivers, and it's an ancestral name that I carry. It came from my great-grandfather, who carried this name, which was my grandmother's great-grandfather. No, great-great-great-grandfather, sorry. And is a name that I share with a cousin of mine in Musqueam as well. So my name is Khelsilem. It's the name that I go by publicly. I also carry a few other what we call ancestral names. These are names that are handed down. They're considered very sacred names because these names come from our ancestors. We're gifted with these names by the elders of our family, and they are handed to us because of various reasons, but one of the main teachings behind it is that it's to give us a sense of strength. Give us a sense of support, that by carrying the name of my ancestor, that my ancestor walks with me wherever I go, and that if I require the strength or ask for the strength of my ancestor, that it is always with me because I carry the name that he carried at one point. And that I will carry the name for the rest of my life and add to that name through the things that I do for my people. And at some point later on in the history of my people, this name will be handed down to my grandkids or great-grandkids or great-great-grandkids, and they will continue on the legacy of what I had done in my lifetime, but also all of the other Khelsilem that had lived in our people. So I am very honored to be here tonight, and also that's the whole kind of history of that and a little bit of teachings about it, but I also want to encourage people not to feel afraid to say my name. a lot of people think that they see it. Well, they see it online and they see it on Twitter and they come up to me, I'm so sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Can you please tell me? And it's fine if you mispronounce it. I'm not one of those, I'm a language teacher, but I'm not one that really feels that hounding people on pronunciation right out of the gate is a useful way to teach language. So if you mispronounce things, that's actually a part of how you learn my language, is by mispronouncing it. So I encourage everybody to really mess up my name. No, I'm just kidding. I always struggle with like how to identify myself, because in some ways I do work with education and language, in some ways I do work with defending the land, and in some ways I do work writing and making silly jokes and being a weird guy sometimes. But it's kind of this thing where I think of what's needed in my community, and also what really speaks to my purpose in life. The revitalization of my languages is definitely a part of that, but one of the really big pressing things is defending the land for me. It's one of the things where I kind of had to, there's only so much daylight in the week, that a few years ago I chose to go the route of working to revitalize my language, and then at the same time try and balance this work of being a defender of the land. And it's kind of funny, I have this like love-hate relationship with terms like activist. There's a quote from one of my co-workers, Gabriel George of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, who says, "We're not protesters in our land." He said, "How could we be protesters in our land when this land belongs to us?" So, it's that kind of idea that these things like activist or protector or defender or protester, if you're a Sun News media reporter. I think they're all labels and they're fine and they're used to describe somebody, but they only work to a certain extent and then they don't work. I believe in defending the land because a really simple reason. I feel it's simple, and I've spoken about it before, which is, I don't own this land. None of us own it. And it's a challenge to say that sometimes without it being misunderstood, because that argument has been misused as a means to dispossess the indigenous people of their land. The whole concept, the racist concept of terra nullius, the idea of an empty land by which the crown could, claim as their own because, one, we weren't utilizing it, or two, that we didn't have a concept of property ownership, and so since we didn't have a concept of property ownership, they could just claim it under their own property laws. So it's kind of misleading for me to say that we don't own it, because in a sense we do, but in a sense we don't. And what I mean by when we don't own it is that this land doesn't belong to me, I belong to the land. It was given to me by my ancestors so that I can give it to my descendants. That's one way of thinking about it, right? So when I think about owning water, owning air, owning the land, there's a responsibility to it that is inherent in all of the fundamental teachings of, people would say my culture, but it's actually my society, my people's way of life. And that there is a sophisticated way of existing as a people on this land that has been developed and existed here for thousands of years, that is expressed in ways that a Western democracy both fails to understand and fails to seek to understand. The way in which our responsibilities to the land are renewed, are taught to our children, that are upheld when we look at our history, but also the fundamental principles of our founding history and our culture. In the Western civilization, you'll have things like constitutions that are these founding, supreme documents in which all law and civilized behavior in society, stems from these super, in a way you could say, like, within settler society, constitutions are very sacred. And there's, I think, a desire to try and elevate, our laws, Indigenous laws, to the same type of explanation. And I always get weary of it, because it's not that I'm trying to justify our laws within a colonial context. I don't want to say that our law, like, there's this thing that I heard at one of the NEB hearings for Kinder Morgan, which kind of really irked me, which was, we're not here to defend our laws, we're here to put our laws on the table to be considered. It's this kind of thing of, like, that we're seeking justification or legitimization of our laws. And I don't want to explain it that way, that I'm trying to equate this, but I use it as an example because I think that if you have a point of reference to understand what I'm talking about, it might be easier for you to understand that. For my people, my culture, we have things like our Skwomesh, which get translated as legends, which is such a poor translation. But our Skwomesh explain how the land came to be, explained how the world came to be. It explains our philosophy about human nature and about society. It explains who we are supposed to be to each other and to the land. It explains all this. The same way, a settler constitution explains things for your society. And so, when I look, like I say, when I look at the fundamental principles of our Skwomesh, it explains very clearly to me and to our people that we have a responsibility to the land. We have a responsibility to protect it, to defend it, to ensure that we can hand it down to our future generations. And so, I choose to fight, I want to contribute to the fight, to projects like the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain Pipeline that's proposed to come through my territory. I believe in fighting that not just as an issue of I don't want it in my territory, but that as Indigenous people who share these common values, that fighting it here is about fighting the tar sands as well. That it's not just about we don't want it in our backyard, it's about we need to stop this here in the tar sands in northeastern BC with fracking. We're doing this together, that we can be in solidarity with each other, but it's not just solidarity, it's being accomplices with each other. It's standing together in the way that our ancestors always did when we were faced with threats to our society and our people and our way of life. So that's kind of that's what propels me to believe that we need to stop projects like Kinder Morgan Pipeline, and why I believe we need to stop projects like the wood fiber LNG, which is kind of a more under the radar project that a lot of people are still learning about. So I come from North Van, but the Skwomesh territory, just to give you a bit of an explanation, includes this area here, Broad Inlet, English Bay, False Creek, heads up to Point Grey, and then crosses over to Roberts Creek on the Sunshine Coast, comes back towards the Howe Sound, all the way up the Howe Sound, both sides of the Howe Sound, up into Skwomesh, and then there's two river systems. There's one at the mouth of, where the town of Skwomesh is, there's two river systems, or there were. They kind of got pushed into one now. There's the Skwomesh River and the Mamcombe River. The Mamcombe River used to be a separate channel, but for some reason the settler colonizers in Skwomesh decided to divert an entire river away from its natural path and pushed it into the Skwomesh River. So the Mamcombe now runs into the Skwomesh. It used to come down closer to the side of where the Skwomesh Chief is, but so there's those two river systems. You travel up those river systems, you got the whole Mamcombe River watershed, and then you head up to Skwomesh, and turns into the Chiakamus River, and that whole watershed. You travel further up, and you turn into the Ashlu. There's that whole watershed. You travel further up, you get into the Ilaho, another watershed, and the Sims Creek, another watershed, and then up to the headwaters of the Skwomesh River. So that, in a nutshell, is the territory of my people. There is a proposed liquefied natural gas export facility for a place called Fibre, which is located, a few kilometers outside the town of Skwomesh. It is a former pulp mill site that operated for many years and then went under and closed down not too long ago. But it was part of a very large industrialization of the Howe Sound that had gone on since the late 1800s. And so there has been different mines that have operated in the Howe Sound, the most famous being the Britannia mine, which completely devastated the inlet in terms of aquatic life. There's an entire no-go zone for aquatic life that exists around the Britannia mine now because of the way in which they were extracting it was a copper mine, the way in which they were extracting it and pouring all of the chemicals into the ocean. And this was before a lot of any kind of environmental regulations even came into existence. And so it was very, very blatant destruction of our water and our land. So there's now there's a no-go zone. It's going to be like that for I don't know how long, but a very foreseeable future. The whole inlet was devastated to the point where a lot of our herring, salmon, porpoises, whales were impacted and didn't come around for a long time. And there's been other projects including on some of the islands, places that we call Skwomesh and Khelsilem, places that in our language that we have a long history to. And so, I grew up in North Van, but like I said, my territory extends to this whole area that I explained. And, I've traveled through the territory and made a point to become familiar with the territory. I had an uncle who passed away about 8-9 years ago, and he said one thing to me while he was still with us, and I always remembered it, which is, he said, you don't know what it truly means to be Skwomesh until you've traveled to every mountain in our territory. I've only been to 10, so I got a few to go, but I got a long life to live, hopefully. But I make a point to know what it means to be Skwomesh, is to be connected to my land and to my territory, and that's a thing that unfortunately a lot of my people who have been impacted by colonization and impacted by modernity, who have been dispossessed from our territory. With our reserves in the North Vancouver area, there's a lot of work that we need to do to decolonize amongst my own people so that we can reconnect to the land. I think of the words of Lee Miracle, who comes from the Tsleil-Waututh people, and she talks about a decolonization where our people fall in love with the land again. That it's not just about this kind of I think about failures of the environmental movement in the history of Canada, where it's this concept of environmentalism where the land is protected by way of a common space. The idea of commons being a form of protection or a form of defense of the land, and that it's a very kind of utilitarian use of the land, that if we create parks, that is in itself a success for defending the land, whereby excluding and dispossessing Indigenous people further through that kind of success, through that kind of victory, where even provincial parks become a point of dispossession for our people. And so I think it's about falling in love with the land again for me. And the Howe Sound is one of my favorite places to be in the world, because it's, I don't know how many people have traveled up to Skwomesh or the Whistler or been on the Sea to Sky Highway. How many people? Just by show of hands. So one of the things that Sea to Sky is often kind of marketed as is this whole thing that's a beautiful scenery. It's one of the most beautiful drives in the world, and gets put on the top 10 lists for that kind of stuff. And it is a very beautiful drive. But there's something, I remember the first time that I traveled in a canoe, one of our seagoing canoes, and traveled from Skwomesh to North Van. And actually to be right down on the water and to be traveling by canoe for hours and to be sitting beneath these mountains that are around you is a different type of experience than just taking 45 minutes to drive through the highway. So the Howe Sound is a very special place for me for that reason. It's also a place where we gather, our livelihood as Skwomesh people. Our fishing, our harvesting still goes on in this area. And one of the things about the Howe Sound is in the last 10 years, both through the work of our own people and through, some of the leaders in my community, as well as a lot of non-native allies who have worked to bring back the life in the inlet, we've seen a resurgence of life. A resurgence of herring, a resurgence of dolphins, a resurgence of porpoises, killer whales. The first time that killer whales showed up in the Howe Sound, it was said that it was the first time in 100 years that a killer whale had entered the Howe Sound, because prior to that it was so poisonous for them to even consider coming in. And we get killer whale. There was a killer whale a year ago actually that came right up to our reserve in the Howe Sound. It actually traveled past wood fiber last year. And then recently, there was a killer whale that came into the inlet here that people might have heard about. It came through the Narrows and was in English Bay. So the wood fiber project is kind of, there's kind of this funny thing somebody said to me. It seems like there's a bit of a lull in organizing around Kinder Morgan right now. I was kind of laughing about that. And I said, well, it's ongoing. It's not going to be the flashy, what were they called again? The symbolic arrests. There we go. I was trying to remember the fun name for the symbolic arrests on Burnaby Mountain. But the wood fiber project is a smaller project as a part of Christy Clark's push for LNG industrialization in BC, and a wholesale sell-off of this resource to finance a small few of the province. And one of the things that I think that is often not really understood about BC is that BC, for its entire existence, BC in the sense of BC's been around for 130, 40 years or whatever, that history of BC, I'm not talking about the other history, but that history, British Columbia and its history has always been this kind of resource colony for the rest of the world. It's always been a boom and bust economy. It was like that for forestry, it was like that for mining, it's like that for oil and gas now, gold even before those things. So this push for LNG industrialization throughout the province is just a long history of dispossession and colonialism that has been ongoing. So it's not like this is a new thing that our people are facing. But this push has meant that our people are faced with these kind of really, messed up options, where there was kind of this wholesale push for diluted bitumen pipelines through BC, and then they waited their time, and now there's this, follow-up with a push for liquefied natural gas, in particular shale gas and frack gas, which has, I think one of the things that our struggle and our movement has a lot of work to do, myself included, is the contextualizing or explaining or making people aware of the destruction that fracking is causing throughout British Columbia. I do got to give my props up to all the people who have been working on tar sands for as long as they have. I remember attending a tar sands conference like almost 10 years ago. Harsha was with me, so that's why she's laughing. But I remember going to this, it was in Edmonton, and the tar sands at the time was this kind of like fringe issue. It wasn't a mainstream issue. It wasn't this thing that people were, there was dedicated activists who have been working on it for a long time. And then within a few years, as the pipelines, Northern Gateway and the now Kinder Morgan started to become more of a focal point, the way in which our movement has been able to paint that picture, control that narrative, and not let it be controlled by corporate interests. Personally, I think I give a lot of props to the work that has done on that area. And I think that the next thing that we need to do is to make sure that people are aware of what's happening with fracking and the destruction that is caused to the water and to the land because of it. I think I kind of talked a little bit about my responsibility to the land as an Indigenous person, and that is a very big part of who I am and a big part of why I do this work. But I also think that there's a part of this which is a little bit of, no, actually not, a huge part of this for me is not so much as an Indigenous issue, but as a human issue. I think about the very real predictions of greenhouse gas emissions and the rate at which our civilization is producing them, and the effect that it's going to have, the long-term effects, the cumulative effects that it's going to have on our climate, and the effects of, you know, rising tides, more drastic weather systems impacting people and communities and land, the destruction of ecology within the world, the displacement and the dispossession of a lot of, you know, already dispossessed and already marginalized communities in the world. And so I see this this fight against LNG and this fight against diluted bitumen not just as a fight for, you know, not just as a fight for a way of life that I hold dear, and that is not in itself an important reason to fight it, but that is also married with this belief that we need to stop this. We need to stop it now. It has to stay in the ground. And we have to find every avenue that they want to make this happen and fight them on it. Whether it be in Skwomesh, whether it be in Northern Gateway, whether it be in the northeastern BC, whether it be in anywhere in the world, that this civilization is not going on a course that is survivable. And I think, like I say, that's a human issue for me. It's not so much an Indigenous issue, although, like I say, they're kind of intermarried for me. So I have deep concerns about all of these things and how it's interconnected and the enormity of it. And it's kind of hard to, you know, for me to think about the enormity of it and not to feel a little bit bogged down or pessimistic almost, right? That there is so much system change that needs to happen. How could we possibly do it all? But I think that the way that we do it is not through just one grand gesture that's going to solve everything, obviously. What about these multiple points of resistance that are coordinated and strategic and supported across, you know, an anti-oppression framework that don't just happen on Indigenous rights issue, that happen on, you know, I think about you know, Indigenous rights, feminism, the rights and justice for migrant communities. You know, there's a whole intersection of it, and I think that there's ways in which it obviously interconnects, but there's these multiple points of resistance that are needed. And so there's a part of this fight against the wood fiber LNG plant. Our group that I'm a part of, that I helped start a year ago, which is called Skwomesh Action, is planning a rally this Sunday, which you are all invited to. We're going to be doing a rally, and we're marching to the wood fiber LNG's offices in downtown Skwomesh on Sunday. Partly to tell them a message. A lot of the organizing in Skwomesh has been organized by a lot of our friends and allies within the non-Indigenous community. And you know, my own people, including the residents of Skwomesh who are from the Skwomesh Nation, have very legitimate and deep concerns, you know, from a local standpoint to the wood fiber LNG, in terms of the risk that it poses to the land and to the water and to the human life, but also the destruction that it is connected to in the fracking. One of the things that we know about the wood fiber LNG plant is that 50% of the gas that will be transported through it will come from fracking. The export facility that's being proposed is connected to a pipeline that Fortis Gas wants to build. That there's an existing pipeline that travels from Khelsilem through the mountains up to Skwomesh and then down to the Sunshine Coast, and it connects over to Vancouver Island. And that pipeline currently services LNG, mostly for domestic consumption. And so they're building this export facility because they need to build a second LNG pipeline to feed just the export facility for the purposes of transporting LNG to China, which is where it will be sold like wholesale to Chinese companies. And so there's a new pipeline, kind of similar to the Kinder Morgan story, right? There's an existing pipeline, they want to expand it. And so we as Skwomesh people are at a place where we're trying to fight this, but we also have minds to convince within our own community. We have leaders of the band council, and for good or worse, the band council is kind of a tricky thing in this area. There's a long history of legitimization of the band council by our own people. We also we don't have a history or a practice of a clan system or a clan mother system, and not even argue a hereditary chief system. The hereditary chief system more so coming into existence after contact through the churches and through the government. We did have our own system of government and governance, but so much of that had been obliterated by diseases and by colonization and by residential schools. And so the band councils are these kind of, I always think about the creation of band councils as a counterinsurgency strategy. I remember reading this article about counterinsurgency theory for the imperialist wars that were happening in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the way that they were, these manuals on how to engage in counterinsurgency in Afghanistan. I felt like I was reading a manual by a Canadian CSIS officer for how to set up band councils in Canada. Like the idea is operating on the same principle, right? You create these puppet governments that you give an air of legitimacy to, and then slowly start to give them more power so that they become the focal point of power within the community. But you're also regulating the type of powers that they have. You're delegating authority to it. It's not true sovereignty. It's not true self-determination. It's not true jurisdiction. And then more recently, which is one of my concerns, my personal concerns, is the way in which band councils or tribal councils think that they have the authority to negotiate or surrender my people's collective rights. And so we're kind of in a hard place where, as it relates to industry and as it relates to government, they've given these entities a lot of power, and a lot of my own people are misled into believing that they are a source of power. And so it's kind of a thing of, do you organize in which the world as it exists, or do you organize in the world in which you want it to be? And sometimes I like doing both. But in terms of stopping this project, we have a very legitimate window of opportunity, which is, we have a council that is undecided as it relates to this project. We have a number of council members, elected council members, who are vocally opposed to the project, and who are vocally supportive of our group that is planning this rally, and have the same type of values around protecting the land and defending the land, even if they have embedded themselves in this kind of colonial system. And then we also have a number of politicians who, time and time again, have shown us that they are willing to negotiate our collective rights in exchange for money and jobs, which is a common circumstance that a lot of First Nations are put into. As you think of a lot of First Nations, my First Nation is a little bit unique, and we're very privileged with the opportunity to generate the kind of economic money that we do because of the location that we're in. But a lot of First Nations are put into a hard economic spot where they're under real pressures to provide a livelihood for their people. Their leaders are anyways. And so they see industry as a way to achieve that goal, unfortunately. And a lot of First Nations communities are seeing LNG as the lesser of two evils, is one of the ways that one political leader put it to me. That it's not as bad, is the way he put it to me, as diluted bitumen. And so, there's kind of a thing where the number of First Nations who are signing on to these agreements, these band councils who are signing on to these agreements, on one hand, but also vocally opposing Northern Gateway or Kinder Morgan on the other hand, is happening. It's a real circumstance that we're dealing at the level that we're trying to fight these things. And so we're planning this rally on Sunday, and we're encouraging everybody to come out and support the Skwomesh people in saying no to wood fibre LNG, to defending the Salish Sea, to saying yes to a Howe Sound that is full of life and abundance, and saying no to the destruction of not just our territory but all Indigenous territories, be it via fracking or the tar sands. And we're asking all to stand in solidarity with us as we oppose this project, just like we ask people to stand and oppose Kinder Morgan. Just like we ask people to support us the way that we want to support the communities who are fighting this in their homelands. If the tar sands were happening here in downtown Vancouver, and I was going out and asking other Indigenous people to stand with me, I understand why my Cree brothers and sisters in the tar sands, or my Dene brothers and sisters in the Northeast BC, or my Wet'suwet'en, relatives here who are asking all of us to stand in solidarity with them and oppose these things. That it's all interconnected, that we all have to stand together on this. And that there's various reasons why. And I think it's important for all of us to become educated, especially as it relates to Indigenous rights, on why. But that there is an important reason for each and every one of us in this room about why these things need to be fought back against, and why we can't let them get away with this, why we have to fight and everybody has to join in that. And that we can do it if we fight together, fight wise. And that's what I ask, and that's my message for tonight anyways. And I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you for this opportunity, for listening to me. The rally is happening in Skwomesh on Sunday. We're assembling at 12 o'clock p.m. At Nexon Beach, which is right at the waterfront when you head into, go to downtown Skwomesh and then head down to the beach. And then we're going to be marching from there to the wood fiber LNG offices and saying hello to them with some very loud drums. So you're all welcome to attend, and please help spread the word if you're a Twitterer, or as my dad likes to call it, a tweeter, like me. So I just want to thank everybody for being here, for coming to listen to us, and for the organizers for putting this on. And I also just want to thank Togastai and Frida for being here as well, and for doing the work that you guys do. And I hope that I can be of service and support and stand with you guys in however I can. So, I'll see you.